Hello viewers, today we are going to look at the different types of intelligence tests. Since the publication of the first intelligence test in 1904, intelligence testing has become one of the most successful applied areas in psychology. Numerous tests have been developed to measure intelligence and the different types of intelligence and have been widely used in a variety of settings. So, today we will look at what is an intelligence test, what are the different types, where they are used, and also we will be looking at a few of them in detail. An intelligence test is a tool which is used to measure thinking ability in terms of a standardized measure. Most intelligence tests yield an IQ or an intelligence quotient, which is a score which tells us about the level of intelligence of the individual. These scores tell us about the intelligence of an individual in relation to other people of the same age. IQ tests are typically used to assess reasoning, comprehension, working memory, and processing speed. Intelligence tests are used in different settings. They may be used for diagnosis in education and clinical work. It is widely used in selection in industry and education, and of course, in the field of counseling and placement. What are the different types of intelligence tests? Various classifications have been used, and let us look at some of them. Intelligence tests may be individually administered or they can be administered to groups. They may be verbal or non-verbal. They may also be just a performance test. Another classification uses the concepts of speed versus power. Speed tests are timed, whereas power tests are not timed. Let us look at each of these in detail. A verbal scale of intelligence relies largely on words. These usually consist of vocabulary items, verbal analogies, general knowledge, and so on. They cannot be used with illiterates or people who do not speak English, and hence they have a tendency to have a cultural bias. The best example of a verbal scale is the Simon-Binet test, which was the first intelligence test. Non-verbal tests, which were developed much later, are considered pure measures of general intelligence and are excellent indicators of abstract reasoning, particularly in the visual spatial domain. They have negligible ethnic bias and therefore are very popular. Non-verbal tests typically may be paper and pencil tests which provide printed non-verbal items. Some of the non-verbal tests may be administered without the use of language. Many of the non-verbal tests require people to determine patterns and relationships between abstract figures. The Raven's progressive matrices is a widely used non-verbal intelligence test designed to measure visual spatial reasoning and general intelligence. The Goodenough Harris drawing test is also a non-verbal test which is a quick and easy test for children. These non-verbal tests are generally designed for primary and preschool children and illiterates. Some of the test batteries consist of performance scales. These performance scales consist of tasks that require a subject to do something. For example, copy symbols or point to a missing detail rather than merely answer questions. They may also involve the manipulation of objects with a minimal use of paper and pencil. These performance tests were developed in order to overcome the biases caused by language, culture and education. Performance scales tend to require a longer interval of sustained effort, concentration and attention than most verbal scales. Because of this, they not only provide a measure of intelligence, but provide the clinician with a rich opportunity to observe behavior in a standard setting. A good test of intelligence must display certain characteristics. Intelligence tests must be reliable, meaning the test yields a certain score on a particular day and the same person is measured on another day a month later, it should yield similar results. The test should be valid, that is, that it must measure what it is designed to measure. Tests of intelligence which are widely used are standardized. That means, the uniform procedures used to administer and score a test are outlined clearly. They also provide test norms which provide information about where a score on a test ranks in relation to other scores on that test. Let us look at some of these scales in detail. The first and the oldest modern test of intelligence was the Binet scale, which was developed in response to a need to identify normal children from subnormal children. The government of France commissioned Binet to develop a scale which was based on age differentiation and general mental ability. The first Binet scale consisted of 30 tasks or tests of increasing difficulty. It began with very simple tasks and went on to become progressively more difficult. There was no measuring unit in the first early scales. It was just used to categorize people roughly into 3 levels: idiots, who were supposed to be the most severely intellectually impairment, imbeciles who had moderate impairment, and morons who had the mildest impairment. Some of the tasks on the 1905 scale included following moving objects with eyes, recognizing the difference between a square of chocolate and a square of wood, repeating 3 spoken digits, comparing 5 blocks to put them in order of weight, defining abstract words by designating the difference between boredom and weariness. In the 1908 scale, items were grouped according to age and the concept of mental age came into existence. This meant that the individual's performance could be compared to the average performance of an individual in a specific age group. For example, if a 6-year-old can perform tasks that an average 8-year-old can, he is said to have a mental age of 8. In 1916, Louis Terman from Stanford University adapted the Binet scale, standardized it on a larger population and brought out the Stanford-Binet intelligence scale, which is in use even today. This was the first time that the concept of intelligence quotient or IQ, which was given by Stern, was utilized in giving a score. The IQ was derived by finding out the chronological age, which was the age in years of the individual being tested, and the mental age, which referred to the performance of the individual on the test. The mental age was divided by the chronological age multiplied by 100, and this gave to us a number which was the IQ of that individual and indicated the level of intelligence. One of the innovations in the 1960 scale was the adoption of the Deviation IQ instead of using the traditional IQ. A Deviation IQ is simply used in the standardization sample to transform all scores so that the mean would be 100 and the standard deviation would be 16. This corrected for differences in variability across the ages. The early Binet scales were to be used only with children and included only a verbal component. But much has changed, and today the modern Stanford-Binet intelligence scale can be used from ages 2 to 90. It measures fluid reasoning, knowledge, quantitative reasoning, visual spatial processing, working memory, and also measures the ability to compare verbal and non-verbal performance. Let us now look at another set of scales which are widely used today. These are the Wechsler scales, developed by David Wechsler. The Stanford-Binet scales in the beginning were used mainly with children and yielded only a single score. David Wechsler was dissatisfied with this and went on to develop the first adult scale of intelligence. To him also goes the credit of the intelligence scales which give us separate verbal and performance scores. Verbal items on the Wechsler scales include general information, arithmetic, similarity between words, and digit span. Performance items include picture completion, picture arrangement, reproducing block designs, and assembling jigsaw puzzles. So, the Wechsler scales included both verbal and performance components in a single scale. It yielded a total IQ as well as a separate verbal IQ and a performance IQ. The Wechsler intelligence scale for children can be used from ages 6 to 16. It measures verbal comprehension, working memory, and executive function skills. The Wechsler adult intelligence scale is used for people between 16 to 89 years. It also measures verbal comprehension, perceptual organization, working memory, and processing speed. There was a downward extension of the Wechsler scale when he developed the preschool and primary scale of intelligence for very young children. The adult scale has been revised several times, and the modern adult intelligence scale includes 10 subtests along with 5 supplemental tests. It yields a full scale IQ score and a general ability index. The adult intelligence scale is scored by comparing the test taker score to the scores of others in the same age group. The average score is fixed at 100, with 2/3 of scores lying in the normal range between 85 and 115. This scoring method has become the standard technique in intelligence testing and is also used in the modern revision of the Stanford-Binet test. Both the Stanford-Binet scales and the Wechsler scales are individual scales of testing intelligence. Very early in the 1900s, during the world wars, there was a great need to develop an effective measurement of mental performance which could be administered to groups. The credit of Robert Yerkes goes the development of the first group tests of intelligence. 2 tests were developed to be used in classifying over 2 million soldiers to specific positions and leadership roles. These 2 tests were known as the Army Alpha and Army Beta tests. The Army Alpha test was designed as a written test and could be used with people who were literate and spoke English. The Army Beta was administered orally in cases where recruits were unable to read, that is, they were illiterate, or with foreigners who did not speak English. These tests were highly successful and have led to the development of other group tests of intelligence. The early tests of intelligence, which used English as a medium, were often thought to be unfair to people who came from cultures where English was not the first language learnt by the individuals. The statements also consisted of situations which were unfamiliar to many of the people who came from different cultures. There was a crying need to develop a culture fair or culture free test of intelligence which could be used across different cultures. One of the most well known of these tests is the Raven's progressive matrices, which is the most widely used non-verbal culture fair test of intelligence, which is designed to measure visual spatial reasoning and general intelligence. There are three forms of this test. We have the standard progressive matrices, the colored progressive matrices, and the advanced progressive matrices. Some of the newer approaches to intelligence testing include testing based on information processing theory, such as those given to us by Vygotsky and Sternberg. These use dynamic assessment and they measure how well new material is learnt with competent instruction. One of the best examples of these is the Kaufman assessment battery for children. Intelligence testing has also been adapted to modern methods such as in computerized testing, which are becoming increasingly popular.